Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inspired and Empowered Living TV show and podcast. And we are live Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern on talk4tv.com, w4wn.com, and my YouTube channel. And today we are going to continue in episode 3 of the Next Chapter series. Today, we'll be talking all about the fear of leaving the familiar. So today, you're going to learn why familiar can feel safer than the unknown, even when it's no longer serving you, and the hidden costs of staying stuck in a chapter that you've outgrown. And so let's jump into the show and help you to understand more about the fear of leaving the familiar. And in episode 1, we talked about the signs that you've outgrown your current chapter. Episode 2, we talked about why your soul may be calling you forward. And today, we're going to be going deeper into the biggest reasons that you stay stuck, even though you know that you're meant for more. So I'd like you all to think about, have you ever known deep down that something in your life or business or career or relationship was no longer right for you, and yet you stayed, or you're staying? And it's not because you didn't know, it's not because you didn't care, but it felt safer, and it feels safer to stay with what is familiar than to step into the unknown. And it feels safer even when it's no longer aligned. And you may be staying in or have stayed in situations where you felt drained, you felt limited, or you knew that they were no longer fitting you. And it was really because it was what you've always known. And so we're going to go deeper into why that happens. So the first thing that I really want to address is we had a conversation last show all about midlife and midlife crisis. And I talked about that midlife can be an opportunity. And I want to talk more about both of those. So because one of the questions last week was defining midlife crisis. So let me define it clearly and a little bit differently than I did last week. So a midlife crisis is often described as a time in your life or when a person begins questioning their identity, their life, their purpose, their relationships, their career, or the choices that they've made. Now, this may have happened to you or it may be happening to you, and you may see yourself in this. And I invite you to look at it the ways that I'm talking about it. So, what happens is when you have that experience, it can bring up feelings for you or for the person who's having the midlife crisis of restlessness, dissatisfaction, confusion, grief, urgency, a fear about time passing, like, oh, I got to get this done because time is moving, or I'm getting so old, or something like that. A sense that something needs to change. And it's often a moment when when the life that you've built no longer fits who you're becoming. And so while the term midlife crisis is commonly used, I don't always think of it like that. So let's talk a little bit, because I really want to describe the difference between an ego midlife crisis and a soul midlife opportunity. And what I was describing last week was all about a soul midlife opportunity. And that's what I want to help you to understand more. So let's talk a little bit about what does it mean for having an ego midlife crisis, or when you are having a midlife crisis and it's driven by fear. And so the part of you that's driven by fear will panic and say, I'm running out of time. What have I done with my life? I need to prove I still matter. I need to fix this fast. I need something outside of me to make me feel alive again. And so that's when, and the common thing is a man goes and buys a red Corvette or a red sports car or something like that. That is something typical when you think of a midlife crisis. And it's often fueled by, but that's just one example, but I think it's an example that's been out there. And it's often fueled by the comparison, comparing yourself to someone else, fear of aging, fear of losing relevance, fear of missed opportunities, fear of not having enough time left. And when we're in that ego-driven place, sometimes what happens is you may make impulsive changes to escape the discomfort. And so what I really want to support all of you in getting aware is the difference between being in the ego, or that wounded part of you, or the part of you that is really calling you. And this is why I call it your soul midlife opportunity. So a soul midlife opportunity feels different. It's not driven by panic. It's not driven by awakening. It's the recognition that something in you is changing. It's the awareness that the life you've lived, or a chapter of your life, may no longer reflect who you are now. And a soul midlife opportunity says, so if you hear yourself saying these things, or maybe these are some of the things that you're really starting to think about, I want more meaning in my life. I want more alignment in my life. I want to live more truthfully or authentically. I really want to live more as my authentic self. I know there's another chapter. I know there's something else for me. That's why we're doing this series. I can't ignore this inner calling anymore. And it's not about trying to become someone else. It's about coming more fully and completely into who you really are, and more fully and completely into yourself. So that's where we are now bridging into. So really look at what's going on perhaps in your midlife or someone else's, and really look at where they're at and what's happening. But this show is for you. And so this is about what happens for you when you're leaving the familiar, when it no longer fits, when you know deep down you know you're meant for more, when your soul is asking you to grow. And what I want you to know is that there still can be fear. So even if there's fear, it doesn't mean you stop, or you stop what you're doing, or you don't take it step by step. What it means is that you are moving into another level, and it's being able to take action in spite of the fear. So, for example, fear may sound like, what if I leave this job and I regret it? What if I change and other people don't understand? What if I'm too old to start over? What if I'm wrong? What if I let go of this chapter and I don't know what's next? And so, what I really want you all to know is that the familiar can feel safe because it's known. And the familiar may be draining you, it may no longer fit, it may even be keeping you small. And so, that's what happens when we have this soul midlife opportunity. And you are being invited by your soul to come more authentically into who you are. So I'm just going to check for questions. Okay. Okay, we have some. Misty says, thank you for giving us a different view. Thank you, Misty. And Mickey says, we need to be able to distinguish between the types. Yes. And I'm hoping that I'm giving you clarity enough so that you can identify the difference between them. And I'm hoping this has made have given you more clarity. And again, if you have any questions about anything that I've said, I'm here to answer your questions. Anastasia says, knowing there is something more, but not knowing what more there is and when to move on is the dilemma. Yes. And we're going to be talking more about that today, Anastasia. So hopefully that answers your question. And again, always, I want to answer your questions. And Misty says, why worry about others? Focus on what you may want. Let go of excessive baggage. That is right, Misty. This is your time, and this time is for you. And what happens is as you grow older and wiser, you start to realize that what once worked for you, always people pleasing. Let's take the people pleasing. And people pleasing may have worked for you at one time in your life because it served a purpose. And then you start to realize this isn't what is serving me anymore. And so it's about moving into alignment with yourself and setting boundaries so that you are saying no when you need to say no, and taking care of yourself when you need to take care of yourself. We just did an email, like in every week I do an email in my newsletter, and for those of you who are on my email list, and we just talked about that. And we talked about that, being able to set boundaries and how important that is. So if you're not on the email list, you may want to get there. Okay. And so let's talk about why would you stay in the familiar even when you've outgrown it? So what I want to remind you is that as a human being, you are wired for safety and predictability, which feels like protection. And your nervous system interprets familiar as safe. Even, okay, and this is what's so wild, is that even if it's painful, unfulfilling, or limiting, your nervous system will still choose safe and familiar because it feels safe, even though there's pain, even though you're feeling unfulfilled, and even though it limits you. And so that is a reason why you or other people stay in careers you've outgrown, relationships that no longer fit, business models, or doing what drains you, and you know that it's not right for you anymore. And then, or staying stuck in patterns of self-doubt, overgiving, and playing small. And what I really want to remind you is that familiar doesn't mean aligned. And familiar doesn't mean that it's healthy. What it means is that you know this, and you know how to survive this, and you know what to expect from familiar. And so your mind will say, at least I know what this is. At least I know how to manage this. What if the unknown is worse? And so I have some questions for you to reflect upon. Where in your life are you staying because something is familiar, not because it's truly right for you? I'm going to repeat it. Where in your life are you staying because something is familiar, and even though it's not truly right for you anymore? And the next question, and everybody breathe. The next question is, what are you tolerating simply because it's known? Again, what are you tolerating simply because it's known? And so, okay, just checking for the questions. So, what the fear of leaving the familiar can look like. And sometimes what I want you to know is that fear doesn't always sound dramatic. Fear doesn't always say, don't do it. Sometimes fear sounds very reasonable. So And it sounds like, oh, yes, I've got to follow that. You don't define it as fear. You don't define it as fear. So let me give you examples of what fear may sound like. Well, maybe I should wait a little longer. I need to be more certain first. I just need one more class, one more certification, one more sign. Now isn't the right time. Who am I to do this? What if I leave and then regret it? What if I fail? What if I disappoint people? What if I can't make it work? Now, I want you to know, if you notice, a lot of the fear sounds like the what ifs. And when I work with my clients, we work on letting go of the what ifs, because the what ifs bring you down a rabbit hole. And it's learning to come back into present time, back into alignment. And fear can disguise itself. So if you have perfectionism or procrastination, or you're an overthinker, or the mind doesn't stop, and the what ifs are really a very popular form of fear and anxiety, because they usually lead to anxiety. And I can't even begin to tell you how many clients I've worked with that have that what if syndrome. So, or it may lead, or fear can disguise itself as people pleasing, and or constant researching instead of taking action, or staying busy instead of really making the move or taking steps to make it happen. And fear often doesn't stop you by shouting. The way that it stops you is by hesitation, by keeping you stuck, not moving. Maybe you're in paralyzed mode, like that paralysis. And so that's what happens with fear. And I'm just going to check, see if there's any questions coming in. Okay, so why leaving the familiar feels so hard? It's because you have an identity attachment. So sometimes, remember, we create identities based on roles that we have in our life, roles in relationship, roles in a job, roles in a position, roles as in a business, or roles in any area of your life. Like I remember when I left my jobs as a social worker, and even though I went into being a therapist as a clinical social worker, I had to let go of the identity of being a social worker at a job and learning to be in my own business. And it created a whole new learning opportunity, an identity that was different than what I had. And that was part of what I needed. So I want you to know that it's about leaving that identity. And so an example of identities that you may be leaving, I've always been the dependable one. I can't leave because I'm the dependable one. And it could be in a job, it could be in a relationship, it could be in your family, or the role that you've played. It could be in any area of your life. And this goes along with being the dependable one. I've always been one with the stable career. Maybe you're in a relationship and you're the only one with the stable career. And now you want to go off and start something new and be an entrepreneur instead of in a job or in a position. And that feels very different and it can feel scary. I've always been the helper, or I've always been the person who puts everyone else first, or I've always done things this way. So those are examples of things you may be saying to yourself, but bottom line is, it doesn't serve you. And then there's fear of loss. So leaving the familiar, there's going to be a fear of loss. And it's the fear of having to grieve, or the fear of letting go of something familiar. So what happens is when you are leaving something familiar, the fears of losing security, and a lot of the security around a steady job, a steady paycheck, or a steady relationship, or just having another person with you if the relationship is not so steady, or whatever it is. Having fears of losing approval. Who are you afraid of losing approval from? Is it your family? Even if you have adult children, it could be your adult children. The fear of belonging, fear of losing, of losing that place of belonging. The fear of losing financial stability. The fear of losing certainty. The fear of losing a version of yourself that you have known for a long time. And those losses feel very real. And here's the thing. I also want you to know they are a real thing where you may need to grieve. Because when there is loss, there is usually grief. And sometimes you may not need to grieve a lot, but you may need to grieve. And some of the things, if you've been in a job, let's say, or a position, let's say you're a nurse or a social worker or some other kind of position, some kind of professional, and you've been in that position for years, 20 something years or 25 years, and all of a sudden you're feeling, I need to retire, or I need to move on, or I'm feeling burnt out. You may need to grieve whatever it is in terms of the loss that you perceive. That's also real too. So it's also about allowing yourself and giving yourself that time to grieve and to be okay with grief and to know that it's part of the process. I will tell you that grief can be part of the process. So another fear is the fear of the unknown. And this is a big one for people, okay? I want you to know fear of the unknown is huge. And especially in today's world with so much uncertainty. And we have uncertainty, doesn't matter where you're living in the world, there is a lot of uncertainty. And so the fear of leaving the known and going into the unknown is real, and it could be really scary. So the familiar may no longer fit, but the unknown doesn't feel clear. And so you may be thinking, if I knew exactly how it will all turn out, I could do it. But really, and rally, growth gives us certainty up front. And what I mean by that is usually it's about taking that risk, having the courage and the strength to trust your intuition, to know that you're being called to something else. And this is about you learning to go deeper into trusting yourself, into trusting your soul, into trusting your higher self, that wise, unconditionally loving part of you. And you may have the fear of judgment. And so you think, what will people think? Will they understand? Will they think I'm making a mistake? Will they think I'm selfish, unrealistic, foolish, too old, too late? Those are all the things that may be going on in your mind. And what I also want you to know is that your soul, if you're being guided and you're allowing yourself to be guided, taking the risk, yes, it's scary, but it's a huge growth opportunity. And sometimes what I want to remind you is that there's baby steps. It doesn't mean you have to do it all at once, or you have to figure it all out, or you just need to figure out the next step. And you need to figure out a way that feels safe to you, a way that feels safe enough for your nervous system to take that next step. And also the other part of this is learning how to navigate, how to have more coping skills, how to be able to take care of yourself through the transitions. And being in the process of that, like I said, part of that process may very well be grief and giving yourself that. And that's okay. And so what I want you to know is that the fear of leaving the familiar is not just about the external change. It's really about all the changes that need to happen internally and what you need to do to take it step by step so that it feels safe for you to keep moving forward. Okay, so Mickey asks, does everyone have to hit all the grief marks to get through things? So I want to let you know is that no, I mean, grief is a very personal process. And, yes, there are steps to the grief process. And you may go in one and out the other and go and, do the waves of grief. But I really want you to know that your grief process is yours, and you don't have to hit all the stages. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just need to allow yourself to be in it. And what I also want you to know is that you could still be in the grief process and keep making the changes. Again, that feels safe enough for your nervous system. So it may be the baby steps, step by step by step. Remember, when you open the door and you want to go through the door of this transition, it doesn't mean you have to take those big steps. It means even if you take the baby steps, baby steps, step by step by step, it's okay. And you can still be in the grief process, or you can still be in all the feelings and still step forward. This is about learning that you don't have to allow the grief or the fear to stop you from moving forward. And Anastasia says, how do you know what you don't know. I love it. How do you know what you don't know? Um, you only can do. Here's the thing. In a lot of the work that I do, the first thing that I do with everyone is help you become more aware. It's helping you to become more aware so that you can discover what you didn't know so that you can now take action on it. If you don't know it, you can't take action. So what I'm going to say is you can't take action on what you don't know. So the first step is the awareness. It's becoming aware of what you don't know, or and that is a part of self-discovery. That is a part of the journey of the next chapter. It's learning to become aware of what you haven't known or what you don't know, and finding the ways to make it safe enough to keep moving forward, baby step by baby step. Or some of you may be able to take bigger steps. It all depends. It all depends on where you are and also how much you process through. And Anastasia said, how long is the grief process? So I cannot give you a estimated time. There are times, if it's a small loss, you may go through the grief process within a few minutes. And then when it's a big loss, like a loved one or a pet, you may be in grief for a very, very long time. But again, I want you to know, it doesn't mean that grief has to stop you from moving forward. And so what I really want to support all of you in remembering that this is a journey, okay? It's not a destination. Your next chapter is all part of the next journey and path that you're on. You're on this path, and it's taking step by step. Sometimes it's baby steps. Sometimes it's bigger steps. You're in the journey. And sometimes it can be scary. And sometimes it can be exciting. And sometimes it's like, okay, you're moving forward. But being in the unfamiliar can feel scary, but it takes that strength and courage within you. And what I want you all to know is that you all have that strength and courage within you to be able to make the changes that your soul wants you to take. And you wouldn't have this idea, or you wouldn't have the feeling, or you wouldn't have something that feels like, oh, there's something else here. So I just really want to support you all in remembering. And what I also want to support you all is that I have a meditation that can also help you get clarity, to help you come into more awareness of what a next step is. It can help you get clarity, help you connect more deeply to the part of you that can help you, calling you forward, and then help you be able to make a decision that you need to make. And so to get this meditation, you're going to go to inspiredandempoweredliving.com/meditation, MEDITATION. So again, the name of the show, inspiredandempoweredliving.com/meditation. And when you and there's also a PDF of it if you don't really want to listen, but you are a choice. You can use the PDF and listen, or you can just listen, or you can just use the PDF. It's up to you. But all of this is all about supporting you to help calm you down, to help you get more clarity of the next step or the decision that you need to make. Now, I also want to remind you, when it's a big decision, you need to allow yourself to be in your process, to be in the process of that. That's part of the transition. So, how do you know if you're staying too long? So, if you're staying in a place where you've outgrown, it can feel safer to stay in the short term, but there's a cost. So the hidden costs may include there's a chronic dissatisfaction you may feel, or a low grade resentment, or you're feeling that emotional exhaustion, or you have a loss of confidence. Maybe you're feeling numb, you've just shut yourself down, or you feel disconnected from joy. You're feeling like you're going through the motions, shrinking your dreams to fit into your fear, and missing opportunities that are trying to find you. So when you're doing that, that's the fear and ego perspective. And you're in that place. And listen, I want you to know it's not wrong. I really want you to know I'm doing these series to help you discover, to help you be aware of what you haven't known, because you can't take action on what you don't know. So this is about discovery. This is about awareness. This is about learning. Oh, that's me. I need to look at that. So I'm hoping that will help you. And then the soul and spiritual centered perspective is like, if you look at your soul and your soul is trying to get your attention by helping you to feel restless, or maybe you feel heavy, or you're feeling unmotivated or confused or emotionally drained. What I want you to know is that is the way your soul is getting your attention, that there's something that feels off, something that doesn't feel right for you anymore. And so the question that I would like to ask you is, what is it costing you to stay where you are? And what I'm going to do is I have some important information, but I don't want to rush through it. And we're starting to come to an end of the show. So we're going to continue it next show. And this part is how to tell the difference between healthy caution and fear-based staying. So how do you know that this is your healthy caution or fear-based staying? So stay tuned, because we're going to be talking about that next show. And we're also going to be talking about we're also going to start talking about learning how to trust the unknown, and what it means to really start trusting the unknown, and how to start loosening your grip on the familiar. And how do you trust when you don't know where you're going? And so we're going to talk about that more next week as well. So join me and us next week for more inspired and empowered living, and episode 4, trusting the unknown, and finishing what we started in episode 3, because we're going to talk more about being able to know the difference between the caution, healthy caution, and fear-based. And I look forward to connecting with you more next week. We are live Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern on talk4tv.com, w4wn.com, my YouTube channel, and you can hear us on the podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Apple, Amazon, and many more. And I wish you all an inspired and empowered day, an inspired and empowered evening, wherever you are, and an inspired and empowered week. Have a great one, everybody. Bye for now.